us home. Sweet adoration flows from your children. Glory and honor and praise are a part of our constant devotion. Love set in motion for the divine one who reigns in our hearts. When I am troubled by heartache and struggle, I come and adore you. You take me away from all worldly sensation and endless temptation. All of my trials are lost in your love. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God.
We'll turn over to Mark chapter 2. Mark chapter 2. Just remember, Mark is the fast-paced gospel. He's the immediate gospel. Immediately. 41 times, Jesus is on the go. He doesn't have time to stop and look at the flowers and the trees, and he's quick moving. He's writing to a Roman audience. Romans don't sit around and have philosophical discussions. They were doers. They were people of action. And so he is the Apostle Peter's biographer. And so we know that he's with him in Rome, likely from 1 Peter 5. And tradition strongly indicates that he was recording these stories, albeit inspired, but through the Apostle Peter. That makes sense when you think about this. And then we've talked about the two questions. Who's Jesus? He's being presented as the Son of God, the Messiah, the Christ. And what does it mean to be his follower? That's what Mark is focusing on. Who's Jesus? What's it look like to be a disciple of Christ? And so all these stories are presenting that for us. Remember, we're up quite a bit up in the northern part of Palestine. You've got Judea down in the south with, of course, Jerusalem. Samaria in the middle, and then up in the northern part is where Jesus and most of the apostles are. The Sea of Galilee, of course, is featured in these stories, and this is where he's been at, up and around Capernaum, which is on the northwestern side of the Sea of Galilee. Very populated area, and that's where he's been. We've noted some of these controversies that he's found himself in. And we spent some time looking at these, the paralytic that we saw in the first part of Mark 2, and then the call of Levi, that he's fellowshipping, he's receiving tax collectors and sinners, and calling them to be his disciples. And so, and then these last three, John's disciples and the Pharisees about fasting, eating on the Sabbath, and then the man with the withered hand on the Sabbath through Mark 3, verse 5. We'll see if we can hopefully get through that. Okay, Mark chapter 2 And let's read verse 18 through 22. Who'd like to read that for us? Okay, Matt Miller, go ahead.
18 through 22.
Yes, sir.
Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. And people came and said to him, "Why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it. The new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins."
Okay, so this one of the questions that often will come up a couple of times is the issue of fasting. Now, you would think that as much as the religious leaders focused and centered things often around things like fasting, you would think that the fasting is commanded it's on every other page in the Old Testament. But you know, there's only one command in the Old Testament for fasting. I'm actually in the law. And it was during the Day of Atonement in Leviticus 16. The people were to fast along with the priest for that once a year atoning sacrifice. That's it. One command, official command from God to fast. Now we know this was a spiritual practice, discipline that they used, incorporated. But you would think as prominent as it is, like a top 5 issue, that there'd be commands everywhere in the Old Testament about it. But there's not. What they had developed, and that introduces, of course, what we're going to see in this section and a couple other times in Mark's Gospel, and all the Gospels, is the issue of their traditions and their interpretations. That is the crux of the issue. And so they had a question about fasting, but it's not about the law. It's about the traditions, or we'll see in just a minute as well, their interpretation of these things when it comes to keeping of the Sabbath. And so they come here and they say, John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. By the way, do you notice everybody's a disciple of somebody here? Does John have disciples? Yeah. The Pharisees, they practice they disciple each other, don't they? Don't they? Yeah. And so everybody's being a disciple of somebody. And so you got John's disciples, you got the Pharisees are fasting. Some people came and asked Jesus, how is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees, again, everybody's being discipled by somebody, they're fasting, but yours are not. And the idea is not that they never fast. Jesus, when he's being tempted in the wilderness, what's he doing for 40 days? So they're not saying they never practice fasting at all. By the first century, according to the Jewish rabbis, they were fasting 2 to 3 times a week. That's what? I'm not good at math, but we're looking at 30, 35% or so, whatever, of the week, they're fasting. So that's the issue, this ongoing traditional binding of traditions and customs when it comes to who should fast, how often, when, what, where. That's what they're talking about. Jesus and his disciples. Now, when you fast, what's supposed to be your attitude, disposition? Humility. Often in regard to maybe what? A struggle you're having, maybe temptation, maybe sin. What are you supposed to do, right? What do we often see in the Old Testament? They need to be fasting and repenting. James would talk about turn your laughter into what? Mourning. And the idea there would be you need to be, You know, and so, you go ahead.
The thing that comes to my mind when they fast is usually there's some kind of big decision.
Okay, there'd be maybe a big decision sometimes. Yeah, absolutely. But the disposition of the fast, person fasting, is somber, is serious, is often, what's the word I'm looking for? But Jesus and his disciples, they don't look like that. They don't act that way. The opposite of that would be joyful, carefree, so to speak, rejoicing, enjoying life. So they look at the disciples of Jesus and why aren't you guys fasting all the time? Why are you enjoying kind of life like this? You should be more somber and serious. You should be more reflective and putting on, fasting and sorrowful and so there's a disposition here that is different. Go ahead.
I always thought fasting is someone that meditates and thinks about God and His power and His love. It concentrates on that only, not the day's cares.
Yeah, there's some of that. I mean, yeah, it's a fast could cover a lot of wide range, and you're denying yourself food. You would be denying yourself the things that in a normal day life you would enjoy, and so they're not doing that. They are, they're 2 to 3 times a week. You're fasting. No drinking, no eating, no. And so what I want you to see is this setup. I'm sorry, Kathy, go ahead. Yeah, the setup here is there's a contrast between what they are doing and what Jesus is doing. So Jesus answers this or deals with this. He explains it here. What's the gist here? He talks about what? Verse 19. What's the analogy he uses?
Can the friends of the bridegroom fast?
Okay, so a wedding. So what's the attitude, the spirit, the mood of a wedding?
Why would you be sad or grieving if it's good?
Yeah. There's something good that has come. There's a change that's happening. Someone is being given in marriage, a daughter to a man. And they're the beginning of a new union, and there's going to be children likely produced, and you're going to have more help on the farm. And this is a joyful occasion. This is a happy time. And so what Jesus says here, he draws a contrast, and he says, no, you don't. The guests don't fast as long as they're with them, but the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. And on that day, they will fast. See, their disposition will change. They will, and then he uses another analogy of no one sews a patch of what? New cloth on an old cloth, because what will happen to that? What's that new cloth going to do? It's going to expand or shrink. And here's the older cloth that's already done that, right? And so what you have here is the issue of compatibility. These two things are not compatible. With what Jesus is talking about. And there's a new and an old. He uses that language. Neither do you put, same thing. What's he say there? You don't pour new wine into what? That's right. Because it's going to expand, that wine will, that process of fermentation. And so you wouldn't put that in there. That's something that won't allow that. And so you've got these analogies about the wedding, the bridegroom, as long as they're with them, they don't fast, the patch of clothing, a new patch on old, the wineskin. And so you've got a contrast of the old and the new. And of course, Jesus has come to institute the new covenant, the kingdom of God now that's going to be brought. And it's going to be distinct. It's going to be different. Now, is there similarity? Jesus said, I came to fulfill the law. He's not opposed to the law, but the two are not compatible in that sense. They're not the same. Jesus isn't bringing about more of the same, of the old covenant.
He's telling them you can't patch the old law and make
Yeah,
it work.
yeah, yeah. He's bringing something new, something fresh, and particularly it's joy. There's joy here that he's going to bring. And so what you see here is a discipleship lesson. The disciples' life is marked by joy. It's by what God has brought anew into our lives. He's brought good, beneficial, new blessings in our lives. And that's what he is talking about. What has God brought into my life and in your life that I need to be a person of joy? You know, the mark of a Christian is joy. Do you believe that? Yeah. Just as a mark of the Christian should be, among other things, you know, it should be purity. There should be several things that should be able to distinguish us, mark us, make us unique and different. We should stand out from, people ought to be able to see us as being distinct. Well, this mark should be distinct for the Christian, for the follower of Jesus, is joy. What has God brought into my life? Not what has God taken from me, but what's God brought into my life. And I think that's an important, joy is a marker of a Christian. The people that we work with, do they know we're Christians by the joy that is expressed in our hearts, our lives, our attitude, our disposition, how we see, particularly how we see hard things, difficult things? How do we respond? By the way, do you think people can see that difference? A joyful Christian versus... Have you ever seen the difference? Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Hey, I don't mean this in any kind of negative thing, but it was funny, right before I came to church, Mason was over at work, and he always calls me and gets all upset and help him, but he said, yeah, he said, we have a new guy, one of the head guys, said, he's real dry, you know, he doesn't really fit in, and come to find, he said he's a Mennonite. What is a Mennonite? And I said, well, you know, it's a very disciplined religious person.
Right.
I said, you know, it's funny when you're just talking, because Mason said, yeah, he didn't joke around and have
Yeah.
fun with all this.
Yeah.
And I was thinking when
Yeah.
you said that, I didn't mean to say anything.
No, yeah, no, it is that's right. And Jesus will talk about that. These religious leaders, the Pharisees, and this is going to get into the whole thing of their traditions and their interpretations, was very much a restrictive, judgmental, do it this way and don't deviate, and this is what you should do and how you should be, and everything was based on and there's often no joy, no love that comes forth, and so Jesus here is drawing a contrast and saying, this is the mark of the new covenant. Those who will be His children are going to be a people who are full of joy, and not that there's not a time and place. Again, I just quoted from James. James will tell them, turn your laughter into sorrow. So there are times when we need to be repenting and with somber attitude of kind of sorrow and prayer and fasting, in the sense that we are reflecting and we're sorrowful over of our behavior. But this is to characterize the Christian. What has God done in my life? What has He blessed me with? And that's what He's talking about here. And so this is kind of the first. This is going to start asking about fasting and issues of the Sabbath. We've already seen a little bit of that. Let's continue in verse 23. Someone get 23 through 28. Who's got that? Okay, Jeff Poe. 23 through 28 now.
One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as His disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to Him, look, why in the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath.
Okay, so another one of these controversies. This one over the picking and the eating of grain on the Sabbath. And here's the disciples going along in a field, grab some of the heads of the wheat, just like you might, eat some peanuts or something, and just right there. I mean, they're doing that. The religious leaders have seen them do that, and they're accused of breaking the Sabbath, doing what is unlawful. And again, the issue is their interpretation and their tradition. It is not about the law, what the law actually says. The law did not forbid this. The law did not. This is their interpretation and application, and that led to their traditions, because they're more concerned, quite frankly, about their traditions. Their traditions were to protect people, they thought, from breaking the law. So don't commit this sin, don't violate the Sabbath, don't work on the Sabbath. Well, it's a good question. What is work? That's fair. And so their interpretation led them to apply all kinds of application, and traditions were developed that said you can't do this and you can't do that, and there are all these different categories of work, and you can't do that if this happens, because that would be considered work. And what's been lost is the whole purpose of why God gave these commandments, particularly the Sabbath that we'll mention. And so it's about their interpretation. And Jesus, of course, is going to he's going to use a couple of principles here. What's the first one he talks about there in verse 25? Gives an example from the Old Testament. Okay, there's a need somebody has. Whose need was that? David. David's on the run. He's fleeing. He's being chased like an animal, pursued. They don't have time. They don't have grocery stores and to get food. And so he and his men are starving. And he comes into the tabernacle there at Shiloh, and he's going to take some of the showbread that was to be devoted and dedicated to God. Only the priest could take of that. And so he comes in here, and notice he's hungry, and he has a need. He has a need. Jesus establishes that a human need takes precedent over your traditions, over your interpretations. He's gonna say here, you've lost sight of that. God's laws are for our benefit, and here's a need that somebody had. And although technically, legally, David was not to eat of this bread, wasn't just to come in there and start eating, there was a need. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Well, this also comes back to the whole idea of intent. David wasn't in there, well, just because I can.
Right, yeah.
There was an actual need, and so
Yeah.
it goes back to the whole idea of what the Pharisees were doing, and their intent was to create a checklist. It wasn't to obey the law.
That's right.
It was to make themselves more important.
So their judgment and their view of law based on their interpretation and their traditions, they weren't about trying to help people. It was about just keeping their traditions, keeping the fences, the sacred cows they had established, and they lost sight of that completely. And so he uses this example of a human need. And then he gives the example of what's he say there in verse 27. The Sabbath was made for man. Why did God give them the Sabbath? Was that to be a burden? No, it was to be a day of what? Of rest, of reflection, of worship. It was to be a day of renewal. I remember I preached that sermon on Sabbath, and I talked about Christian Sabbath, basically. I think it was a couple years ago here. Had a lot of comments because I really came after that idea that we don't practice any kind of Sabbath nowadays, and certainly in America, and certainly even as Christians. Matter of fact, the Lord's Day is often loaded up with work and ball games, and I understand ox in a ditch. I understand responsibilities when someone has a job or a company. But we work when we don't often have to. We play when we certainly don't have to. And Sunday just becomes a day of running and going. And God intended, He didn't intend for the Lord's Day, for these times of worship to be a burden on it. You got to go to church. He wants it to be, what's Sunday, what was the Sabbath again given for God's people to be? A day for them to spiritually what? Physically, emotionally, rest, renew themselves, revive themselves. What should the Lord's Day be for us in that principle? Same thing. Same thing. Again, I understand work. I understand things come up. Sometimes we're in things that, we may be involved in something extracurricular that may take place on a Sunday or for a few hours. I understand that. But God didn't give us these things to burden us and to make our life miserable. He did it to be a blessing. But again, what they're doing is they're putting their interpretation and their traditions, stacking it on God's Word and saying you're violating God and His Word for not doing this. And so the Sabbath exists for man's benefit. God's Word is not to be a burden. And they've lost sight of that with their interpretation, their traditions. And then he says the third thing, what's he say? Verse 28, so the Son of Man is what? Lord. Jesus has the authority to determine what is binding and what is God's law. They are binding their interpretation, their traditions. Jesus said, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. If you're the Lord of something, what's that? You've got the what? You've got the authority. You've got the power. Now, go back to the paralytic. Well, this should have already showed, they've already been shown this, remember? When Jesus sees the man, they lower him down, and first thing Jesus says, your sons are forgiven, and they say what? You can't do that. Only God has what? That authority. And so Jesus purposefully did that, and He said what? So that you may know the Son of Man has power to what? Authority to forgive sin. I say to you, get up and walk. And so they've already seen that Jesus is showing His authority. And He's showing His authority over the law. He's the Lord of the Sabbath. And I think that's important that we see that here in this regard. And so their traditions, their interpretations, their fences they had built around the law were not a blessing, they were a burden. God's commandments were to be a blessing, not a burden upon us. And that's what they've turned them into, particularly their interpretation, their customs, and their traditions. Now, we're not going to talk a lot about this. This never has been a problem in the church still, right? I mean, we've never had issues with interpretation and traditions, right? I've never known of a congregation that's ever, well, yeah. We have to be careful. When we bind our interpretation, when we bind traditions, even if we think we're exercising in the best way possible God's command to assemble on the Lord's day and to sing and to, but we can bind every little thing. Well, you got to do it this way. You got to do it that way. You can't do it this way. You've got to interpret it. You got to interpret it this way. We have to be careful with that because we can be a burden upon people, and it can be a divisive, ugly yoke that's put upon people, and there's no joy there. And so Jesus said, "I've come to bring you this new wineskin and new way of seeing things." So it's a yeah. Go ahead.
You started out with fasting, and I was thinking, I know some people that do that. I always find it kind of a little. I respect for them to
Yeah.
do that for whatever purpose.
Sure.
But I always find it funny that they
Yeah, we're not supposed to keep practice it in the secret. Jesus tells us And again, the Pharisees, what did Jesus say later on? I mean, in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, remember when they're fasting and they're praying, what are they? They're showing it, right?
They make it
Very publicly that they're miserable. And so absolutely. And so Jesus here, this controversy of fasting, this controversy of working on the Sabbath, and again, that's going to be a constant issue. Jesus says, no, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. Sabbath was meant to bless man, not be a burden upon man. And so he gets there. Okay, let's look at chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Get this last controversy. Who'd like to read that? Mark 3, 1 through 6. Okay, Dolores.
And he entered again into a synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they were watching him to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath, in order that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, Rise and come forward. And he said to them, Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill? But they kept silent. And after looking around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, he said to the man, Stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. And the Pharisees went out and immediately began taking counsel with the Herodians against him as to how they might destroy him.
Yeah, that ending there, if I don't able to get to it. Here's someone who's doing this incredible, powerful act of goodness and demonstrating God's power upon him, and they go out and want to kill him, plan to kill him. But we'll come back to that. Go ahead.
let their own
Yeah.
traditions.
Well, he's a threat to that. Yeah, he's a threat to that.
They put their traditions
Yeah.
and will ahead of God.
Yeah, he's a threat, and I've had that conversation with even people in the church over the years that says, well, if we stop doing it this, look what that's going to threaten basically our church existence. That's going to threaten how we've done church, or that's going to how we spend our money. Or I mean, that's still a big issue. But go ahead.
We're all creatures of habit.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between habit and tradition that's come to worship.
Yeah.
A lot of difference.
Yeah. And so here Jesus is coming in the synagogue. He sees this man with the shriveled hand, and they're looking at him. And I'll tell you, if someone's ever watched you, have you ever had to work and you're being observed? That's kind of, it's a little bit unsettling. And especially if you know that they're looking for what? A mistake. That's right. Now, I'm always thankful when I've had members in 26 years of preaching, and I believe I poured out my heart into a sermon with just passion and everything I could give it. And the lovely member of the church tells me, you said Paul, and that was Peter, and I always want to say, thank you. Did you get anything else out of that sermon? But anyway, I'm hoping they didn't come to catch me in a mistake, but because they're going to find them every week. But the point is, they're watching him, and it's almost like Jesus just kind of wants to take the bait. And so there's this man with the shriveled hand, and he takes him, and he says, stand up in front of everyone. I mean, what's Jesus do? I mean, he's doing this on purpose, right? He's wanting to make a point with these religious leaders. And he said, what is lawful? And I love Jesus, how he turns the tables on them always. He asks them a question. Which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil? To save a life or to kill a life? Now, that's a trick question, because if they answer yes, if they say that it is lawful to do good and save a life, what does that put them in? What are they complaining about? And what are they doing about? If they say no, I mean, who wants to follow a cold, heartless, right? People that would say, no, it is not lawful to do good. Suffer. Be miserable. We're miserable. I think there's been a few Christians, maybe even a few churches. It's like, we're miserable. You're going to be miserable with us if you attend this church. I'm sorry. I just think that's how sometimes. But Jesus says, he puts them in a situation where if they say yes, then he's going to, as Matt says, well, why don't you do something? If they say no, well, that's going to be appealing to the crowds, right? And the Pharisees love their popularity, right? Because unlike, I don't know if I've said this yet in this class. I know I've said it before here probably, but we think the opposite. We think religion practiced in the first century with the Jews, Pharisees, bad. No, if you ask them in the first century, who's doing it right? Who do you admire? They'd say the Pharisees. They are the ones that are the held up. And so they're popular, but they make it impossible to follow their religion. But he says, which is to do good, to do evil, to save a life. And they know they're caught because what do? They don't answer. Now, sometimes that's the only play you can make. I understand we've all had to be like, well, I can't say anything if I say, but they're cowardly. They know, but they won't say. Jesus, now here's verse 5. He looked at them in anger and greatly distressed at their stubborn spirits. It's interesting here, Jesus' emotional state it's a word that has the idea of wrath, of hot. He's indignant. This is not, he's a little bothered. He's a little upset. He's hot. He's furious. He's indignant. He's angry about that. Go ahead, Matt.
The ESV has grieved at their hardness of heart, which I think gets to the crux of the problem.
Yeah.
They're trying to use their traditions instead of looking at the intent of the law.
Yeah. So I want to say a couple things here about this. First of all, you can do what Paul said, be angry and do not sin. Now we got to be careful with that because everybody thinks they got righteous indignation about everything sometimes. It gives them a right. What Jesus shows us is how to respond in your anger, in your righteous indignation. And Matt I think, is on the right track. He's grieved also in his heart because of what they're doing with the law. And what they're doing is they've made their traditions equal to the law. And therefore they bind that upon people and the people can't keep it. But I want you to see that his anger is not ruling his spirit. He's not lost sight of the situation. When we become angry often and we try to respond to something, it doesn't always go well because of what? We let it get personal. We let it, we get so emotional that stuff starts coming out of us that's not beneficial, right? Maybe words, behavior, nonverbal, whatever. We take an object. You ever walked in, been in, say this, I'm not going to say Maggie and I have ever done this because we have, I'll just say it. And you walk in to help and you're having a fight with your spouse and they're cleaning this way. Just set this down. Can I help? No, it's fine, right? What are they communicating in that? Is that the time to say, well, let's talk about this probably? Maybe it's not the time, right? Or maybe your wife, ladies, you come out in his shop and he don't want to talk about it. He's grinding away at that, and you're trying to force a conversation. He's telling you what? Back off. Get out of my garage, basically. So Jesus, is he angry? Oh, he's indignant about what they're doing. But he isn't making it personal in that sense. He's grieving, as Matt says, what they're doing to the people and to the law of God. And so he's able to respond to them as well with a distressed spirit because of their stubborn hearts. And he tells the man, stretch out your hand, and he stretched out his hand, and he was completely restored. And so he didn't allow his perception, didn't allow it to change his perception of who he was, of what he came to do. And he even loved them. We know what, I mean, does he love the Pharisees? And yes, he loves them. Is he angry? Is he upset by what they're doing? Absolutely. But his heart is still for them. And he's going to not let that anger cost him a way to respond and understand why. And so part of this is to respond as Jesus did when we have anger, and that's to have self-control. And so I just want you to see that Jesus, his reaction, his emotions, is very powerful here. And of course, he heals the man, and it's the most incredible, crazy thing you read. Here he's done this to this man, healed him of his withered hand in front of everybody, and their response is, let's go out and plot. And not just plot with anybody. Who does it say? Herodians. And we can't get into the history of all this. They hate the family of Herod. Absolutely. Herod is not Jewish. He is a puppet appointed king by the Romans. They hate the family of Herod. But interesting bedfellows, right? When you have the same enemy. And so they go out, and not only do they want to plot and kill, they join with the Herodian bunch, because Jesus, of course, is a threat to all their power and their influence. And so their response to this miracle of God, of healing a man who's had a withered hand, is to let's go out and let's kill him. Let's figure out how we can kill him. It's just, it's so, their hearts are so hardened. And that will continue. We'll only continue to see that. So, these controversies. And Jesus he's in the middle of them. But I think he shows us a lot of good things still about God and the intent of God and God's commandments being a burden. Not a burden, but a blessing for us. And so, anyway, any thoughts, final comments, questions on these stories? Something jumped out on you or stand out to you? Any questions?
Some of the things they seem to ignore seem so impossible. How
Yeah.
do you ignore the fact that he actually
Yeah.
healed this man,
Yeah.
basically his voice?
Yeah. And again, we see the same thing sometimes when we act and we lose sight of the focus of we can tear our witness, we can destroy our credibility, we can destroy the church if we allow our petty differences and traditions and interpretations and what we think ought to be how everybody ought to live and do. And we can lose sight as well as they did. And so we've got to be careful with that. All right, well, go ahead. So, Jeff, we'll give you last.
I was going to say, we think of the Pharisees as such, kind of a bad
Right.
thought when we think of Pharisees. It's kind of funny, when I was younger as a Christian, some of the things, you had the few things that you're just like, I remember I get so.
Right.
And as the older you get, it's not so important.
Right.
And even the phrase we get, it's the same.
Yeah.
When you look at things. I remember my dad pulling me out of a sleeping bag on Sunday morning, like 6 o'clock, so I wouldn't miss church.
Yeah.
And I was always so proud of that, but a few years ago,
Yeah.
he said, I wouldn't do that now. And it is just, it was so strict, and, we
Yeah.
went to church with the flu.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got to be careful with our religion becoming a burden, and it continues to be a struggle. All right, we'll pick up there. So be reading through Mark chapter 3, the rest of it. All righty.